Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Express Publishing and Prosveshenia to this webinar this morning. My name is Daniel Morris. I'm an academic consultant for Express Publishing, and I'll be conducting the two webinars this morning with you. The first webinar will be on ESP, talking about ESP and career paths. And the second webinar will be on primary learning. So let's start with the first seminar. So our first seminar, as you can see from the slides, we're going to be talking all about ESP, and in particular how to empower or how to enhance our ESP learners' employability skills. As you know, as teachers yourselves, English is becoming more and more sought after in the globalized world, with many different companies looking for English skills in particular. And with so much competition for these different types of jobs, it's important for us as teachers to be able to provide our learners with enough skills and enough knowledge for them to have enough opportunities in the working world. So in this webinar, we'll be looking at, first of all, employability and what employability means to professionals. We'll also be looking at some general theory behind ESP and how it relates to employability skills. And we'll also be looking at some ways that we as teachers can help develop employability skills in our ESP classrooms, using some practical examples taken from career paths. So let's begin. When we talk about employability, I think it's always a good point of reference to think about what employability actually means. Many people have tried to define what employability means, and when I was preparing this talk, I actually looked through some different definitions of employability, and I found some different takes on it. One of the most important, or one of the most interesting definitions of employability is from Sewell and Paul in 2007. And they say that employability is having a set of skills, knowledge, and personal attributes that make a person more likely to choose and secure occupations in which they can be satisfied and successful. So, quite simply, employability means that how well prepared a person is to first obtain a job and then also be successful in that job. And this is something that we as teachers can take into account with our ESP learners. Whereas in the past, employability depended perhaps on a university degree or only on having qualifications, it's quite clear that in today's world, employability depends on many different factors. We can see here from the presentation slide that I'm showing you now that employability very much depends on knowledge, so what you actually know related to your field of work or study. It also has something to do with your skills, so how well you can apply your knowledge to your job, and also your attitudes, how people approach their job, their work. If you think about being a teacher, for example, we have the knowledge, all of us have the, a knowledge of English. We have, quite useful English skills. But to be a teacher, we also need to have our own approaches to teaching. We need to be able to have a good relationship with our learners. We need to be able to identify their needs. We need to be able to be flexible. We need to be able to see problems in a class and think of ways to help our students become more confident. So this really comes down to attitudes. So really the point here is that employability, as I said before, perhaps in the past employability was just seen as having a university degree guaranteed you a job. In today's world, it's very different. I think that we need these three options here, or these three factors: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Also are quite important for learners, for professionals in securing a job. One key example of this is that today many different universities that offer degrees have put more focus on employability. If we take a look at this sample it's taken from the University of Leicester, from their webpage, they have their own section just on employability. So we can see here in the first section, I've underlined in red that at the University of Leicester, we want to ensure that you have everything you need for your future career, not just the degree, but also skills, knowledge, and experience, and confidence to make you make your mark wherever you want to go. So we can see here that many universities also share this opinion that employability is more than just a degree. It's something that we need to be able to develop with our learners. It involves different skills, it involves knowledge and experience that the learners can then later apply to their working life. So this is something that universities put a lot of effort into achieving. Now, just from going to university, this doesn't necessarily ensure that we can have our degree or have our work experience. Something that we should also take into account is the role of ESP in employability. Not everyone gets to go to university, and university isn't the only way that we can develop employability skills. We can also develop employability skills through ESP, or English for Specific Purposes. I'm sure as teachers you're all very aware of what ESP is and some of the background behind it. Let's have a look at some of the general theory behind ESP and how it can relate to the employability skills that we're talking about today. So when we think about ESP, it's important to take into account that ESP has many different branches or many different categories that come underneath ESP. So we can see here that under ESP we also have English for Academic Purposes, or EAP. This is normally done by, let's say, in an academic setting, by learners studying in higher education, for example, in universities. And many EAP learners quite often are not experts in their field. They are trainees, or they are going through a course to develop their English skills to be used later on when they complete the course, when they go into their specific field of study. We can see underneath EAP, for example, we have English for Science and Technology, or English for Medicine Purposes. So you could imagine some trainees that are studying medicine. They would also take an EAP course for medicine purposes and improve their English skills specifically for their field of medicine. On the other hand, we also have English for Occupational Purposes, or EOP to be short. This is normally done in a more professional environment by learners who are already experts in their field, but they want to develop their English skills for use in their job or in their area of work. So underneath EOP, we have English for Professional Purposes or English for Vocational Purposes. And this can encompass medical purposes, or English for business, and vocational English. Now, in both cases, in EAP and EOP, the English that is being taught and learned by the students is being learned with a specific goal. And this goal is for the learners to use English in their professional daily lives. So in this respect, ESP is very different from, let's say, a general English course, where the objective is to develop English skills in a more general basis, to understand the language, to be able to gain skills, An ESP course does the same, but it's more specifically focused on what the students or what the learners need for their job. So in this, for this reason, ESP, when we think about ESP and its aims, ESP has quite specific aims for the learners. It has many different aims, quite a lot of them. I don't want to go through all of them today, so I've narrowed them down to the four most important areas that ESP covers. And these are the main objectives when learners take an ESP course. This is how an ESP course can help them in their employability skills and help them in their future professions. First of all, ESP aims to develop communicative competence. When we talk about communicative competence, this means that the ESP course aims to provide the learners with the necessary language and skills that allow them to use English correctly and appropriately in their jobs. You could imagine, for example, an ESP course in, let's say, hotel management. The course would be aiming to provide the learners with enough language and enough skills to be able to communicate with customers, with guests, and with other members of staff in a correct way, but also in an appropriate way, using courtesy, politeness, customer service, and people skills. So this is what we mean by developing communicative competence. Our second aim is for ESP to meet specific needs of the learners. When we talk about ESP and what it means, when we think about how many different professions there are and how many different ESP learners that we have, an ESP course has to meet the specific needs of these learners. If we think about, for example, a taxi driver that's studying an ESP course, now what kind of skills would a taxi driver need in English for their job? Perhaps for a taxi driver they would need, of course, listening skills, listening to directions from different customers, for example, and also speaking skills. Perhaps for a taxi driver, writing and reading wouldn't be so much of a focus for them. However, if we compare a taxi driver with, let's say, a business course, then in a business course, someone studying ESP for business purposes would have more specific needs. They perhaps need all four skills, the reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills, to be able to operate in their job effectively in English. So this is something else that we need to consider. What our learners' needs actually are for their job, and how our ESP course is going to provide these specific needs to the learners. Now, one of the ways that they can do this is using specific methodologies, our third point of reference. When we talk about specific methodologies, we mean that the ESP course will try to provide the learners with as much material and as much experience as they need to replicate real-life situations in their job. So, for example, let's say an IT technician. An IT technician studying an ESP course, perhaps an IT technician would communicate most of all using emails or online. So many of the methodologies in an IT technician ESP course would perhaps focus on online communication, web design, or emails and communication in this way. Our final point, our aim is also to focus on specific language. Each ESP learner is going to require a certain amount of topic-specific vocabulary to operate and communicate effectively in their job. So the aim of an ESP course is to provide the learners with this specific language and structures that they will need in their future employment. So these are some of the aims that we've been talking about for ESP. Together with specific aims, many ESP courses also have some very specific characteristics. When we talk about the characteristics of an ESP course, we can look at authenticity and specificity. Now, when we talk about authenticity, if we have a look at the diagram here from Richards, 2001, when we talk about authenticity in an ESP course, we're talking about creating indispensable communication context in the classroom and the real world outside. What we mean by this is that ESP courses try to use as much authentic material as possible to provide learners with a realistic experience of English. So, for example, in an ESP course, you would expect to find authentic materials, including texts, dialogues, conversations that the learners will encounter in their real job. So when we talk about authenticity, we are simply talking about preparing our learners in the most realistic way possible so that they gain enough experience and knowledge to apply it in the real world outside. Now, when we talk about specificity, the other side of ESP, if we look at this this quote here from a name that is very, very difficult to pronounce, so I won't try to. It's from 2015. It's using specific and purposeful uses of language targeted at a learner group and related to their reality. So, when we talk about specificity, we're talking about using specific language that the learners will need to communicate in English effectively and operate in their job effectively. Now, each learner, as we discussed in the previous slide, each learner will have specific needs. So it's important for the ESP course to focus on these specific elements of language, on these specific skills, so that the learners are familiarized with the aspects of the job that they will be performing. They may also have some prior experience that will be used. So it's important for the ESP course to provide the learners with these specific materials, this specific language that they can be familiar with in their job. So, talking about authenticity and specificity, let's look at some examples of how we can use authentic and specific materials inside an ESP course and how they can help our learners to achieve and acquire different employability skills. So, talking about specificity, we can see here on this slide, we have three different professions, three different ESP courses. We've got nursing, art and design, and also a course on agriculture. And we've taken here some of like a lesson plan or a detailed lesson plan of what the learners will be studying in their specific lesson. And as we can see from each profession, the overall aim is the same. In all three lessons, the learners will be developing their written communicative skills by writing emails. We can see in nursing, art and design, and agriculture, we're going to be writing an email in this lesson. However, in each profession, the learners will be writing emails for different reasons. If we think about the reasons why a nurse would write an email, compared to the reasons why a professional in agriculture would write an email, the reasons for them writing an email would be very different. So it's important for the ESP course to isolate the specific needs of the learner and then help them develop in this way. So that's why for each profession, we can see specific vocabulary. With nursing, we have abbreviation, assessment, chronological order, comprehensive, concise, for example, and the overall goal is to write an email identifying errors. With art and design, we're writing an email but for a different purpose. In this email, the learners will be describing the layout of a picture which relates directly to one area of their job, and for this we're providing them with, again, specific vocabulary, so alignment, center, column, for example. And in this email, they'll be describing the limitations of a picture. So the overall point that I want to show with this slide really is that this is how specificity can come into play in different professions. We have the same goal to develop English skills, but the needs of the learner will be very different. So it's important for the ESP course to provide the learner with enough specific language and enough specific situations so that they can develop their English skills in a way that is going to be familiar for them in their job. As we can see here, another further example, if we compare the different types of writing activities that ESP learners from nursing and agriculture can complete, we can see that the topics will be very different and very specific. A nurse, for example, in terms of writing, would complete admission forms, medical reports, discharge forms and nursing guides, whereas someone in agriculture would be writing for completely different reasons and using very specific language in their writing. So we'll have a soil analysis report, a seed catalogue, trade profiles, and also product licensing as well. So this is where specificity comes into play, and it's important for employability skills, as it really gives the learners this specific knowledge and skills that they're going to be using later on in their professional development. So having looked at specificity, we should also look at authenticity. As I mentioned before, authenticity in ESP courses is all about providing learners with enough realistic experience and enough realistic exposure to English so that they are already familiar and accustomed to using English in everyday life. And this can be something that's very valuable to them when they come to actually performing their job, that they've already studied, they've already used English in these situations in the classroom. So authenticity is all about preparing students in the most realistic way possible to achieve their employment goals. When we talk about authenticity, we can divide authenticity into different areas. When we're thinking about authenticity in an ESP course, we should consider the students first of all. If we think about our different materials that we're using, we should always be using authentic materials, and the students should be able to use the materials in a way that's going to help them in the future. So for example, if we are looking at, let's say again, if we're looking at IT technicians studying an ESP course, the materials that we would be using, for example, would be emails, or we'd be using lots of online or internet focused materials that they could study, something that would be realistic for them when they come to their real life experience of the job. We should also consider teachers, the role of teachers. As you know, and as I'm sure many of you are ESP teachers, we are first and foremost teachers. We are not experts in these specific fields the learners are studying. We're not experts in IT, we're not experts in nursing or in agriculture. So an ESP course has to be able to be adapted by teachers. It has to be able to provide teachers with enough resources and enough tools so it enables us to teach the class effectively. We have, we don't want to have problems where we don't understand what we're teaching our learners. So in terms of authenticity, many ESP courses should allow for the teachers to adapt the materials effectively and to use them to help the learners develop their English skills. And finally, when we talk about context and content of an ESP course, we have to make sure that the ESP courses first of all focus on specific topics and functions, and also that the content is always driven towards communication. At the end of the day, in an ESP course, we want our learners to be able to use English as a means of communication. So our ESP materials should always have a focus on communication. How are our learners going to use these materials to be able to communicate effectively in their professional working life? So if we have a look at the next slide in terms of authenticity, we've taken here a scope and sequence from food service industries, from career paths, and we've highlighted in red some of the authentic areas that the students will be covering during the class. In terms of topics, For the food service industry, we have parts of a restaurant, tabletop items, food service equipment. So we're looking at authentic, realistic topics that the students will be developing their English skills with these topics in mind, because all of these topics will be something that they will use in their, in their regular day-to-day working life in the food service industry. You could imagine a waiter, for example, talking about reservations or taking orders from Unit 13 and 14 that I've highlighted here. So in terms of authenticity, we're preparing these learners to be able to focus on real-life situations. And the same in terms of functions. Presenting options, responding to apologies, asking for help. These are situations that many of our ESP learners could find themselves in their working life. So the focus here is to help our students gain these important skills by creating these authentic, realistic situations in which they can develop their English skills. And in this way, we are enabling our students to gain vital employability skills as by studying ESP in an authentic environment. They are, in effect, gaining useful experience and useful skills that they can then later put into practice in their job. So, we've talked a lot about the skills and knowledge that we can provide our students with in terms of employability skills. As I mentioned before, in the beginning of the presentation, we talked about our different employability skills, knowledge, skills, and also attitudes. When we think about attitudes to employability skills, it's also important to take into account the idea of soft skills. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with soft skills. Soft skills is, for those of you that are not familiar with them, when we talk about soft skills, these are really the personal attributes that people have that enable them to work effectively with other people in the workplace. They're not necessarily technical skills, they're more personal skills that come from yourselves. So, for example, when we talk about soft skills, we can focus on different skills that we have. So, for example, communicative skills. It's important to be able to communicate effectively with other people, not just through speaking day to day. Think about how we communicate in different ways. We communicate in our daily lives through emails. We communicate through by telephone, for example, by phone calls. We also, when we think about communicative skills, we can also think about public speaking or presentation skills. These are essential soft skills that we have to, help our learners to develop because they're skills that they'll be using day to day in their job that will help them effectively work with other people. If we look at the second point, we can focus on critical thinking, for example. In our day-to-day jobs, we'll be, depending on the job, we may be faced with different problems, and it's normally up to us to be able to find the solutions to these problems. So through critical thinking, we allow the learners to develop different skills that allow them to become critical thinkers, to think outside the box, to find solutions for potential problems, to be able to think effectively for different solutions that they may be presented with. In terms of leadership, this can be another important soft skill to have. Think of, for example, different management roles. It's important in leadership to be a good listener, to be a good communicator, to be able to negotiate with other people. So these are some different skills that we should also develop with our learners. In terms of positive attitude and teamwork and work ethic, these kind of fall under the same category in that we have to allow our learners to develop these skills to become more flexible in the workplace, to be able to work well with other people, to be able to work effectively within a team, to be able to communicate and negotiate with other team members, and to be able to perhaps put themselves in positions to help the rest of the team. So these are some essential soft skills that we should also aim to develop in our ESP classroom. Now, the reason I've decided to focus on soft skills so much is that according to a recent, well, not a recent, but according to a Harvard University study of soft skills, it found that 85% of job success actually came from the development of soft skills and people skills, opposed to only 15% of job success came from technical hard skills. So it's quite an interesting and quite an important discovery that was made, in that most people in their professional life will be successful if they're able to be good communicators, if they have a good work ethic, if they can work well with other people. These are the skills that are more regarded by employers than actually the skills that they need to perform the job. And actually this study, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, actually took place in 1918. So for over 100 years now, many employers have known about soft skills and have known about the importance of soft skills in the workplace. So it's really something that we should consider and something that we should aim to develop in our ESP classroom. How can we help our learners become critical thinkers? How can we help them become negotiators? How can we help them develop a good work ethic and good communication skills? This is something that will ultimately help them increase their employability skills and provide them with enough experience to be able to be successful in their area of work and work harmoniously with other people in their job. So this is just some examples here of some different, of the importance of some soft skills in the workplace. If we have a look here at this advertisement, this is a receptionist advertisement taken from maybe 20 or 30 years ago. It's quite a simple job description for a receptionist. If we just have a look at the job description in general, so first of all, to greet visitors, answer phone calls, maintain order at the front desk, ordering and mail supplies. With essential functions, we have to, the receptionist has to answer the telephone call promptly and don't leave the callers unattended. Now, if we have a look at this receptionist ad, we can see here that a lot of the job description focuses on hard skills, only the skills that the receptionist needs to perform the job. Now, if we compare this advertisement with a more modern receptionist advertisement, so here we have a receptionist ad, the same job, but a more modern approach, we can see here that the requirements have changed very drastically. I've underlined in red some of the soft skills that a receptionist will need to have in addition to their hard skills. So in addition to the responsibilities that we can see at the bottom, so answering the phone calls, managing the sign-ins, logins, developing filing systems, receptionists need to have adequate soft skills. So they need to be an administrative juggler, they need to be a flexible multitasker, they need to have a positive attitude, an outgoing personality, interpersonal communication skills, plan coordination, organizational skills. They need to be self-motivated, they need to work autonomously, they need to be resourceful, punctual and reliable. So we can see here that the focus is very much on these soft skills needed for the job. These are the skills that ultimately are going to be the most looked at by the employers. The employers may see that the candidates have the hard skills, but they'll be most interested in if their receptionist has these soft skills and can actually demonstrate them in their specific area of work. So this is the overall importance of soft skills. So we've looked a lot at the general theory of ESP and how it can affect different employability skills. We're going to move into the final part of the presentation now, or the final part of the webinar, and we're going to be looking at how we can develop these employability skills inside our ESP classroom. And to do this, I've borrowed some theory from Tomlinson, 2001, and he gives a general outline on how ESP materials can help develop our learners. And he identifies 4 main areas that our ESP materials should focus on in order to help our learners develop their skills. And as we can see from the slide, first of all, our ESP materials need to be instructional. They need to inform the learners about the language. So they need to be able to provide learners with enough topic-specific vocabulary and show learners how to use this vocabulary effectively in their job. The second point, that the ESP materials need to be experiential. So they need to, the ESP materials, they need to provide the learners with exposure to the language they're studying in a real-life context. So they need to be able to show the learners how to use this language properly in real life. The third point is that the materials need to be elicitative. So they need to stimulate language use. So in our ESP classroom, when we're developing our different vocabulary or different skills, we need to be able to allow the learners to use this, this language, these skills inside the classroom, so that they'll later be able to use them in the outside world. And finally, the ESP materials need to be exploratory. By exploratory, we mean that the ESP materials need to seek discoveries about language use in natural settings. So again, we have this kind of realistic element that the students kind of use their prior knowledge, use their experience, and be able to use their experience to discover how the language is used in a natural context. So I'd like you to keep this slide in mind as we go through the examples, and we can see how each of these different examples can be seen in career paths, and how career paths can help our students develop their employability skills. So we're going to be looking at some examples taken from career paths, hotels and catering, and we're going to see how we can develop our ESP employability skills throughout a lesson. So we're going to go through a lesson together, and we're going to have a general overview of the different skills the learners will be developing. So as we can see here, we have our lesson. In career paths, each lesson is divided into a double-page spread, and each lesson has an overriding topic that sets the vocabulary, the skills for the lesson. So we can see here our overall topic of the lesson. We're talking about hotel amenities. So we're talking about the different facilities, the different activities that the guests can do inside a hotel. And as we can see, within our lesson, we have, first of all, some focus on topic-specific vocabulary, and we also have the integration of all 4 language skills. We have our reading exercise, we have our listening exercise, our speaking, and our writing. And this integration of the 4 skills is directly related to our topic of hotel amenities. So our students will be developing their English skills specifically to talk about hotel amenities, and specifically to inform guests about the different things they can do inside a hotel. So each lesson normally begins with a focus on our vocabulary, and this will normally take place with a warm-up activity that will be introduced by the teacher's book. Or perhaps, as we can see on the previous slide, we had the topic-specific vocabulary is introduced with pictures, with a warm-up activity. Now, what's the purpose of a warm-up activity? As teachers, I'm sure we all use warm-up activities in our classrooms. A warm-up activity, first and foremost, in ESP is used to introduce the topic-specific vocabulary. We need to be able to provide the students with the vocabulary they will be needing in their job, and to talk about the hotel amenities. With the pictures to describe the vocabulary, this provides visual presentation of vocabulary. It's important for our ESP learners to make connections between the new vocabulary, what they know already, using these pictures to be able to visualize it. We have in our classrooms many different learners prefer to visualize new vocabulary. So that's why we have the vocabulary presented visually. And finally, our warm-up activity familiarizes our students with the topic-related lexical items. So before we begin working with the different skills, we introduce the vocabulary and we allow the students to acquire the vocabulary and practice it a little bit and become more familiarized with it. So in this way, by doing the warm-up, it's instructional. We are first of all informing the learners about the language, exposing them to the language they'll be using in their ESP course, and allowing them to be presented with it and familiarize themselves with it. So in this way, it's instructional. Then, having looked at the vocabulary, the students will then proceed to do a reading activity that uses the topic-specific vocabulary. Now, in the same way that we used a warm-up activity, the students here will be using a pre-reading activity, like a warm-up for the reading activity. And we can see here we've got a get ready section. So before you read the passage, talk about these questions. What activities do hotels offer guests? What places can you find inside a hotel? So why do we have this activity before we even have a reading? Well, we can use this activity, first of all, for the learners to begin using some of the vocabulary they've already studied. Many of our learners will already have some experience of working in hotels, perhaps, or hotel management. So the idea behind this activity is to get students to use their prior knowledge, use their prior experience, and to talk about it effectively. So we have the pre-reading activity for different reasons. First of all, the learners can think and discuss details or information related to the text. So these questions that we saw in the previous slide, they allow the students to talk about the topic-specific vocabulary together, and this vocabulary will be seen later in the reading, so they're already familiarized with it. They'll be able to recall previous experience and knowledge. This is what I was saying earlier, that students will already possess some level of experience and knowledge. So with the pre-reading activity, they'll be able to make these connections. And our third point, our students will be encouraged to talk about the vocabulary. By introducing these questions, we give the students the opportunity to communicate and to talk together about the different questions, which is always our goal in ESP. We want our students to be able to communicate effectively. So this is the goal behind these questions. And lastly, we want our students, before they encounter the reading activity, to understand the vocabulary and to see it in context, so that when they come to reading the passage, they'll have a good understanding, we hope, of the vocabulary and how then they can see it in a real-life authentic text. So in this way, the materials are elicitative. They stimulate language use through asking questions. The students are using their vocabulary that they've studied already. They're using some of the new vocabulary from the lesson, and they're connecting it with their prior knowledge, and they're able to communicate effectively. When we come to the reading text, we can see here we have a brochure, and inside the brochure we have the topic-specific vocabulary that's ingrained or implemented inside the brochure. So when our students come to do the reading, first of all, we can see it's an authentic text. It's taken from a real-life text that our learners will be encountering in their work, in their place of work, and it's providing them with the vocabulary in context. When they finish doing the reading activity, we have some text deconstruction questions. So we have questions 1 to 3 here. These questions can normally be found inside the teacher's guide for the book, and the main reason for these questions is to focus on specific information. The students go back through the text and they find specific information and answer the questions together. This can be done as a communicative task again, so students can work together and answer the questions. And in this way, it provides exposure to the language in use. They're using a realistic text to answer questions that perhaps customers or guests would ask them in their place of work. You could imagine a guest asking a hotel manager or a hotel staff, when does the hotel restaurant open? So the learners are using the text as a way to get these skills for their future job. Here we have the reading skills. So we have a focus on reading comprehension. The students are again working with the topic-specific vocabulary, and they are looking at the text for specific information. Now, at the beginning of the lesson, we introduced a lot of different subject-specific vocabulary. How can we, as teachers, how can we enable our learners to acquire this vocabulary and assimilate this vocabulary effectively? When we introduce 10 or 15 new different words to our learners, it can often be very difficult for the learners to remember all of these different vocabulary items. So it's important for us to have materials that enable them to acquire the language and remember it and internalize it. So we can see here in exercise 3 and 4, we have a grouping activity in exercise 3. So the students place the different vocabulary, so surf the web and vending machine, hotel, restaurant, under different headings that help them to remember and categorize the new vocabulary. So if we're talking about food and drink, we'll look at the vending machines or an ice machine. If we're thinking about exercise activities, we can put workout, or we can look at a fitness center, for example. So the students are categorizing the new vocabulary into more manageable categories that they can then later remember if needed. In exercise 4, we have an activity where students try to define the new vocabulary using definitions. So if we look at example 1, George works hard all year long. On vacation, he wants to spend time not working. So here we would have the word like relaxation or something like that. So the students will be using the topic-specific vocabulary with the definitions in a more meaningful way. So it helps them to acquire the language rather than just memorizing it. It allows them to internalize it in meaningful ways. In this way, the materials are exploratory. The students are finding out about the language in natural settings. In natural settings, we have here the definitions. We have realistic phrases or comments that the students can use to acquire the language. And finally, when the students have finished reading the text, we have a listening comprehension activity. So listen and read the passage again. How many places in the hotel can you get food from? So the students will re-listen or reread the brochure and listen to the language so they can hear the correct pronunciation and intonation of the language, and also so they can focus again on listening for specific information, which again would be a very important skill for their profession in the future. So that was how we can develop different skills throughout our ESP lesson on hotel management. I'm going to show you very quickly now. A lesson on information technology and how we can develop these skills through information technology. So again, we focus on an authentic text. If we're thinking about IT, many IT ESP learners will be looking at emails. So we have an email here or a letter, and inside the letter we have a topic-specific vocabulary. And we also have different pre-listening activities, teaching concern, and brainstorming phrases used to express concern. When we're talking about problems or when we're talking about issues in the workplace, quite often we have a lot of concerned people. People worry about problems. So we have to, we have to introduce our students to the idea of concern and how to express that they're concerned about something, how to tell their manager that they're worried about something. So we have here some different exercises to brainstorm ways to express concern. So I'm worried that, I don't think we can, I'm afraid. That could be a problem because we allow the students to brainstorm these different phrases that can be used later on in their workplace, and to assimilate useful language for their job. Now, in this part of the lesson, students will also be able to develop their soft skills, something we talked about earlier. So by doing the pre-listening activity together in groups, students will be developing oral communication skills, listening skills, critical thinking. We present them with a problem, and the students have to find a solution to that problem. They may also have a lot of decision making and problem solving to do in this part of the lesson. So this is something that the students will be doing, maybe not consciously, but while they're doing the activities, they are also developing these soft skills, which is very important, as we looked at before in the presentation. We're running a bit short of time. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to briefly go through the final part of the presentation. So again, we're just going to focus on some more activities. When we come to our listening activities, for example, we have topic-specific dialogues. Here we have a listening activity where students have to complete it with specific vocabulary, and they're also introduced to some of the useful language that they will be needing later on in the lesson. When they come to the speaking, for example, students can use useful language. We provide useful language in the box, and it's also there so students can create their own conversations that are similar to the listening activity that they've already studied in the class. So we have here student A and student B. Student A is a programmer, and student B is a programming employee, and they're talking about some problems inside the department, and they're trying to solve these problems and think about what the department needs to improve. Something else that we can focus on when we do our speaking activities, something that can be quite useful, is that when we have our speaking activities in the classroom, we should always try and make them as realistic as possible. If you imagine, if you have two people talking about a problem, perhaps one of the people in the problem will be quite worried or quite anxious, and they want to express their concern, and maybe another person in the conversation may be quite hesitant. They don't want to solve the problem, so it's not something that they may be comfortable with. So if we have this activity here, we can have student A and student B. We can have student A express their needs, and student B should express concern and hesitancy. So they can use this useful language in a more meaningful way, and at the same time we're developing our soft skills, as in the workplace, when we're faced with a problem, we need to be able to act professionally in that kind of situation. So through realistic and meaningful activities, the students are getting some experience and getting some valuable skills into how to problem solve and how to communicate with their manager, with their different employees. So this is how we can add an element of realism into our class and how it can be made more meaningful. As we said before, our soft skills through speaking, again, we're developing oral communication skills, listening skills, critical thinking, decision making, problem solving, and also negotiating. If we have a problem, sometimes we may need to negotiate the best option. So we allow our students to practice using these different skills in the classroom that they can take into their place of work. And finally, with our guided writing topics, we can use all the vocabulary we've used to create an email. In this exercise, we're using an email. So we're using conversations that students have already used. We're using a model. The students use the model to create their own email. So we're developing our writing skills here, and the students will be able to effectively develop their writing skills in this way. In this way, it's exploratory, and it will seek discoveries about the language again, as students will be writing a realistic email with the embedded vocabulary. As we said before, these are some of our soft skills that we'll be developing from the writing activities. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about mixed ability ESP classes, but I think we're running a bit short of time. So if we just skip to the end of the presentation, As you can see through career paths, we have lots of different resources available to the teachers that help the teachers and students. We have glossaries that have the subject-specific vocabulary. So we have, in each book, we have over 400 vocabulary items. We can see here we have the pronunciation, we have examples. The teacher's guide contains all of the instructions, all of the answer keys, the audios and suggested answers for the writings and speakings. And it also has, here we can see some of the suggested answers, audio scripts. And it also, Career Paths also contains a mixture of different printed and digital materials. Through Express Digibooks, this is our online platform. Students can work with the content online, and we also offer different subject-specific materials, which I'm not sure if I can show you the video today, but for each lesson, we have a subject-specific video that will allow the students to see a video that is directly related to their area of work and that will contain much of the topic-specific vocabulary they have studied throughout the lesson. And this can be some of the advantages of using these authentic documentaries. We can focus on skill, language, and different activities. So if we look at the different skills, we have a number of different skills that the students can develop by watching these specific videos. In terms of language, we have specific vocabulary, tenses, questioning, giving opinions, and lots of different activities that the videos can be used for. So the materials that I've shown you today are from our Career Path series. We currently have over 90 different titles for Career Paths. We can see some of the, I think these are some of the newest titles to come out. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation in the webinar today. If you do have any further questions, please visit us at Express Publishing, and also you can visit us at careerpaths.com as well. Perhaps the last 5 minutes I can answer a few questions that I think you've been submitting a few questions throughout the webinar, so I can focus on some of these questions. Okay, so first question, asking about are there any special students books for musicians? At this moment in time, I don't think we have anything, but to my knowledge, I think we are developing a book on music. That's something that I will need to check, but please do keep an eye out in our catalogue. I think very soon we'll have some kind of information on that, so we can provide some further information on the music book. Are there any special books for kindergartens? So our ESP courses are primarily targeted at adults, so we don't have any specialist books for kindergartens at this moment in time. As I explained before, ESP normally is something that would be studied by adults in higher education or in a professional setting. So most of our series is targeted towards more adults than kindergarten. Webinars on how to write a CV. Perhaps in the future we can do a different webinar on CV and things like that. However, in our Career Paths series, we actually have, I think we have different sections in some of the books on how to, I think perhaps on how to write CVs and also how to develop interview skills. So I think if you have a look on careerpaths.co.uk, you can find some more information, and some specific titles do include some information on CV writing and things like that. There are no students' books for teacher training colleges at all. We really need them. So I think here you're talking about teacher training as a course, as an ESP course. So maybe that's another title we can look into. To my knowledge, there's nothing at this moment in time. So let's see about that. For chemistry, I think to my knowledge we are currently developing an ESP book on science. I think that will be coming out quite soon, and I think it will include some chemistry elements in it as well. So When I have more information on that, perhaps through Prozvišenia, you can find out more information when that becomes available. All of our books that I've shown you today are available through Prozvišenia or through the Express Publishing website. There you can find our eShop, where you can find all of our titles readily available for purchase. That includes all of the different components, the student's book, teacher's books, and audio materials. And that's about it. I think we'll finish there with the webinar. That's about an hour. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I hope you found it useful. I think that before we begin our next webinar, if you have, I think we have some time, perhaps I can take you through some of the vocational exams that we also offer through our Career Paths website, through Express Publishing. I'm just going to show you a few slides, if I can find it. So for those of you that are not familiar with International Vocational English Examinations, Express Publishing and the University of Greenwich have a partnership. It's a new partnership that involves vocational English exams. So from all of the career path titles that I showed you today, we have Express Publishing and the University of Greenwich have designed some exams that provide the ESP learners with an internationally recognized certificate that they can use to enhance their employability options. They can use it on their CV, and it's something that can hopefully provide them with more opportunities in the workplace. These international vocational exams, as I mentioned, so they're organised by Express Publishing and the University of Greenwich in London, and they're called Interveng for short, International Vocational English, or Interveng. So we offer unique certificates to learners of vocational and professional English through our ESP courses. If I just skip through some of these, so we offer two different certificates. One of the certificates is the certificate of attendance. So these are awarded to learners that participate in the Interveng course. They enroll at an exam center and complete the courses with a portfolio. So in a portfolio, the learners will complete 21 quizzes, consolidation tests, written assignments, and speaking assignments. When they've completed all of these different assignments throughout the course, they will be presented with a certificate of attendance to certify that they have completed their ESP course. Learners can also sign up for a certificate of examination. This is slightly different. The webinar, so the certificate can be obtained by passing a specialized examination, where the certificates are awarded if the learner passes this specific examination. As we can see here, we have currently available 63 different exams for our ESP courses, with some more ESP courses currently in development. So we do have a science examination that will be made available, also plumbing and paramedics, for example. So these are new exams that will be coming out hopefully this year. The examination itself has 5 parts. It focuses on all 4 different skills. As we can see, part 1, listening, knowledge of linguistic means is part 2. Part 3, knowledge of language functions. We also have part 4, reading, and part 5, writing awareness. So the examination focuses on all of these skills that the learners will have developed throughout their ESP course. And we can see here a more detailed breakdown of the ESP exam. So we can see 5 parts, the content, and also the focus and preparation. Now, we could go through some of the exam materials, but all of this information is readily available on our website, which I will provide you at the end of the slides. So here we can see some of the materials that our students will be doing for our listening part of the exam. So a multiple choice listening exercise. Part 2, in terms of linguistic knowledge, we'll have some different gap filling or multiple choice activities to select the correct language to fit the conversations. Again, we have more multiple choice questions, selecting the correct responses. So here students are developing their skills on how to respond or use language appropriately in different situations. In terms of reading, students look at authentic texts and answer multiple choice questions based on the texts, so that they can gain some experience using these texts that also focus on a lot of the topic specific vocabulary that they would have studied throughout their ESP course. And finally, in terms of writing, students will be completing, for example, an email or a letter using specific language structures to demonstrate that they are aware and they're able to use language appropriately and correctly in different writing activities. And these are some sample quizzes from the certificate of attendance. These are some quizzes that our learners may be expected to complete to receive their certificate. So finally, why do this kind of certificate? So it could be very beneficial for your learners, as it's a unique international certificate. It focuses on ESP, so the learners will finish the course with a certified qualification that they can show to their employers that certifies that they have passed their specific ESP course. The test materials also reflect real workplace scenarios. Again, during our ESP talk, we talked about authentic materials and specific materials, so much of the exam will try to replicate what our learners will be expected to perform in their workplace. And in this way, it offers professional development as the learners are gaining valuable knowledge, skills, and experience for their chosen area of work. And finally, it guarantees a quality of examination. Express Publishing and the University of Greenwich are constantly updating their exams to make them more up-to-date and keep them more realistic and focused on what employers will actually be looking for when hiring candidates. So for more information on the exams, please visit www.interveng.com, and for any questions or queries that you may have, please visit info@interveng.com, where you can see all of the sample materials that I demonstrated to you today. You can also see a list of all the available exams, and also you can see all the available exam dates if you wish to register for an exam or if you wish to register for a course. All of the information will be readily available for you through this website. Thank you very much. So I think now perhaps we'll have, let's say, a 2 or 3 minute break while we prepare the next presentation, and I'll join you back in 3 minutes and we'll be talking all about primary learning.